They tried to ruin my wedding because they thought I was poor. They didn't know I was a millionaire. I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but after everything that's happened, I need to get this off my chest. Buckle up, because this is going to be a long one. The beginning. I met Ryan 4 years ago at a charity fundraiser in Chicago. I was volunteering, wearing jeans and an old college t-shirt, hair pulled back in a messy bun. He was there with his company as a sponsor. Our eyes met across the room while I was setting up folding chairs, and he came over to help. There was something genuine about him that drew me in immediately. He didn't care that I was dressed down, or that I was just a volunteer. We talked for hours after the event ended. What Ryan didn't know that night was that I wasn't just some random volunteer. I was actually on the board of directors for the foundation hosting the event, and I owned a tech company that specialized in financial software. I started it in my dorm room 7 years ago, and by the time I met Ryan, it was valued at over $20 million. But I've always been private about my success. Growing up in a middle-class family in rural Michigan, I learned the value of hard work and humility. My parents taught me that real character shows in how you treat others, not in what you own. So I drove a modest car, lived in a comfortable but not extravagant apartment, and rarely talked about my business unless specifically asked. I preferred to be judged for who I was, not what I had. Ryan and I hit it off immediately. He was a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm, smart, funny and kind. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about people. He volunteered regularly and treated everyone from the barista at our favorite coffee shop to the CEO of his company with the same respect. I fell hard and fast. Meeting the family. 6 months into our relationship, Ryan suggested we spend Thanksgiving with his family in their suburban Connecticut home. I was nervous but excited. Family was important to both of us, and I couldn't wait to meet the people who raised such a wonderful man. The moment I walked through the door of the Matheson family home, I felt the temperature drop. And I don't mean literally. Patricia and Richard Matheson gave me plastic smiles and limp handshakes. They showed polite interest when Ryan proudly told them about my small business. I had simply said I worked in financial software, without elaborating on my ownership or the company's success. But I caught the sideways glances between them, the subtle raising of eyebrows. Throughout dinner, Patricia peppered me with questions about my background, my education, my parents' occupations. With each answer, her smile became more strained. When I mentioned growing up in rural Michigan and my parents, Dad a high school teacher, Mom a nurse, I saw her exchange a loaded glance with Richard. "And where did you go to college, dear?" Patricia asked, swirling her wine. "Michigan State," I replied. "I was the first in my family to go to college." "Oh," she said with a small, tight smile. "That's nice. Richard and I met at Yale, of course. As did Ryan's sister and her husband." The message was clear. I wasn't from their world. I didn't have the pedigree they expected for their son. Ryan, bless him, seemed oblivious to his parents' cold reception. He held my hand under the table, beamed at me across the cranberry sauce, and kept trying to steer the conversation to my accomplishments. But each time he did, Patricia would interrupt with a story about Ryan's ex-girlfriend Melissa, who I learned came from a wonderful family with a summer home in the Hamptons, and was now doing extremely well at her father's investment firm. By dessert, I knew exactly where I stood with the Mathesons. I wasn't good enough for their son. I didn't have the right background, the right connections, or they assumed, the right financial status. But I loved Ryan, and he loved me. So I smiled, helped with the dishes, and told myself it didn't matter what his parents thought. I couldn't have been more wrong. The engagement. 2 years later, Ryan proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. It was perfect, simple, heartfelt, and entirely us. I said yes without hesitation. That night, as we lay in bed planning our future, Ryan brought up the subject of his parents. "They'll come around," he assured me, though I could hear the worry in his voice. "They just need time to get to know you better." I hadn't told Ryan about all the small slights and dismissive comments his parents had directed at me over the past 2 years. I didn't want to put him in the middle, or make him feel like he had to choose. But the truth was, Patricia and Richard hadn't warmed to me at all. If anything, their behavior had grown worse. When Ryan called his parents to share our engagement news, I could hear Patricia's shrill voice through the phone. But you've only known her for 2 years. Darling, are you sure about this? You know your father, and I always thought you and Melissa would work things out. Ryan defended me, but I could see how much his parents' disapproval hurt him. He wanted their blessing. He wanted us to be a family. Let's invite them to dinner, I suggested. We can go somewhere nice, tell them about our plans. Maybe once they see how serious we are, they'll accept it. Ryan brightened at the idea. That's perfect. I'll call them right now. I didn't tell Ryan, but I had another reason for suggesting dinner. After 2 years of enduring the Mathesons' condescension, I was ready to reveal the truth about my financial situation. Not to brag, but to eliminate at least one of their objections to me. If they knew I was financially secure, more than secure, maybe they'd stop treating me like a gold digger. The dinner. We met at Everest, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. I made the reservation under my name and requested a private dining room. When the maitre d' greeted me by name and ushered us to our table with excessive deference, I saw confusion flicker across Patricia's face. You must come here often, she remarked, glancing around at the opulent surroundings. The owner is a client, I said simply, which was true. My company provided financial software for his restaurant group. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you for trying so hard with his parents. If only he knew what was coming. Throughout the appetizers and main course, Patricia and Richard were their usual selves, politely dismissive of me, while blatantly steering the conversation toward topics that emphasized the gap between our social standings. Patricia mentioned their country club at least 4 times. Richard brought up Yale twice. When the topic turned to wedding plans, Patricia's eyes gleamed. Well, of course, we'll want to hold it at the club, she said, not bothering to ask what we wanted. I'm thinking June. I'll call tomorrow about booking the main ballroom. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Mom, Emma and I haven't decided on a venue yet. We were thinking of something smaller, maybe outdoors. Patricia waved a manicured hand. Nonsense. A Matheson wedding is an event, darling. We have a reputation to maintain. And who will be paying for this event? Richard asked, looking directly at me for perhaps the first time that evening. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel Ryan tensing beside me, ready to defend me. Before he could speak, I smiled at Richard. Actually, I'd like to discuss the financial arrangements for the wedding. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Richard and I are prepared to contribute what is appropriate for the groom's family, she said stiffly. But traditionally, the bride's family covers the majority of wedding expenses. I nodded. In some traditions, yes, but I've always been something of a non-traditionalist. I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder, which I placed on the table between us. What's this? Richard asked, not making a move to open it. That's a copy of the pre-approval letter for our wedding venue, the Botanical Gardens. I've already paid the deposit. I paused, letting that sink in. And I've also included some information I thought you might find relevant before we move forward with planning. Richard reluctantly opened the folder. Inside was the venue confirmation, along with a recent article from Forbes featuring me and my company. The headline read, From Dorm Room to Boardroom, How Emma Chin Built a $20 million Tech Empire Before 30. I watched as Richard's eyes widened. Patricia leaned over to see what had shocked her husband into silence. You see, I continued calmly, I'm actually in a position to pay for our entire wedding myself. Ryan and I don't need financial assistance from either of our families. The look on Patricia's face was priceless. Shock, disbelief, and the slow dawning of realization that she had severely misjudged me. Ryan looked equally stunned, but for a different reason. Though he knew I was successful, I had never told him exactly how successful. It wasn't something I advertised. I don't understand, Patricia finally stammered. You said you had a small business. I said I worked in financial software, I corrected gently. My company, FinSecure, provides cybersecurity solutions for financial institutions. We currently protect over $40 billion in assets across North America. Richard was still staring at the Forbes article. Why didn't you tell us? He demanded, a hint of accusation in his voice. I met his gaze steadily. I believe people should be valued for who they are, not what they have. I wanted to be welcomed into your family for my character, not my bank account. The silence that followed was deafening. The aftermath. I'd like to say that dinner ended well, that the Mathesons immediately apologized for their behavior, and we all laughed about the misunderstanding. That's not what happened. Patricia recovered quickly, pivoting to a new strategy. Well, this is certainly surprising news. But money isn't everything, you know. Family background, traditions, connections, these things matter in our circles. Ryan had finally found his voice. Mom, stop. Just stop. You've been horrible to Emma from day one, because you thought she wasn't good enough for me. Now you find out she's more successful than our entire family combined, and you're still finding reasons to look down on her. Ryan, please, Richard began, but my fiancé wasn't finished. No, Dad. I've watched you too subtly insult and dismiss the woman I love for 2 years. I kept telling myself you'd come around once you got to know her. But that's not going to happen, is it? Because this was never about Emma's job or her money. It's about you thinking no one is good enough for your son, unless they come from your exclusive little world. I placed my hand on Ryan's arm, trying to calm him down. It's okay. It's not okay, he interrupted, his voice breaking. I love you, and I love my parents, and I've been stuck in the middle trying to make everyone happy. But I can't do it anymore. Not after tonight. With that, he stood up, threw his napkin on the table and walked out. I quickly apologized to his parents, left my credit card for the bill, and hurried after him. I found Ryan outside, pacing on the sidewalk, his breath making clouds in the cold Chicago night. I'm so sorry, he said when he saw me. I had no idea they were treating you that way. I knew they were difficult, but I didn't see how bad it was. I wrapped my arms around him. It's not your fault. And I'm sorry you felt you had to hide your success from me, he continued. I don't care about the money, you know that, right? I fell in love with you when I thought you were just a volunteer at a charity event. I laughed softly. I know. That's why I love you. We decided to give his parents some space. Ryan was hurt and angry, and I didn't want to come between him and his family. Despite everything, I knew family was important to him. The plot thickens. A week after our disastrous dinner, I received a surprising call from Patricia Matheson. She wanted to meet for lunch, just the two of us. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near my office. Patricia was already there when I arrived, looking perfectly put together as always, but with a tension around her eyes I hadn't seen before. After ordering, she got straight to the point. I want to apologize for my behavior, she said stiffly. Richard and I had misconceptions about you. I nodded, waiting for more. When nothing came, I said, I appreciate that, Patricia. She fidgeted with her napkin. Ryan hasn't been taking our calls. He seems quite upset. He is, I confirmed. He feels caught in the middle. Patricia sighed. Look, Emma, I'll be honest. You weren't what we envisioned for Ryan. We had certain expectations. Because of my background. Yes, she admitted. But I can see now that we were short-sighted. Something in her tone made me suspicious. This sudden change of heart felt too convenient. What exactly are you saying, Patricia? She leaned forward. I'm saying that Richard and I would like to move forward. We want to be involved in the wedding planning. In fact, I've taken the liberty of calling the botanical gardens to discuss some ideas. My suspicion grew. You called our venue? Yes. And they were very accommodating when I mentioned I was the mother of the groom. I've also reached out to a few of our connections. There's a wonderful caterer who did Melissa's sister's wedding, and a dress designer who's simply marvelous. And there it was. Patricia hadn't had a change of heart about me at all. She'd simply realized I had money, which meant the wedding could be the social event she'd always wanted for her son. She still didn't respect me. She just saw an opportunity to leverage my resources for her benefit. I smiled politely through the rest of lunch as Patricia outlined her vision for our wedding. When we parted, she hugged me and called me dear for the first time. I felt like I needed a shower. That night, I told Ryan about the meeting. He was furious. They're trying to take over our wedding now that they know you can pay for it. Unbelievable. I had to agree. But something else was bothering me. How did your mother get the contact information for our venue? I never mentioned the name of the botanical gardens at dinner. Ryan frowned. That's weird. Maybe she looked it up. Maybe, I said, but my instincts told me there was more to the story. The next day, I called the venue directly and asked about any communications they'd had with Patricia Matheson. What I learned made my blood boil. Patricia hadn't just called to discuss ideas. She had attempted to cancel our reservation, claiming to be acting on my behalf. When that failed, because the venue required such requests in writing from the person who made the booking, she tried to make significant changes to our contract, changing the date, increasing the guest count by nearly 200 people, and adding costly upgrades. She'd told them to send the additional charges to me. Had I not intervened, we would have either lost our preferred date or been on the hook for an additional $45,000 in charges for changes we never approved. I was livid. This wasn't just interference, it was deliberate sabotage. The strategy. That night, Ryan and I had a long, difficult conversation. We loved each other and wanted to get married, but his parents' behavior had created a toxic situation. I suggested postponing the wedding until things calmed down. Ryan was adamantly against it. That's exactly what they want, he said. They're hoping to either take control or make things so difficult that we give up. He was right, of course. So we decided on a new approach. Instead of fighting the Mathesons directly, we would appear to cooperate while quietly making our own plans. I called Patricia the next day. I heard you spoke with the botanical gardens, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Oh yes, dear, she gushed. I have so many wonderful ideas. The space has potential, but it needs a proper designer's touch. I swallowed my anger. I've been thinking about what you said, about family traditions being important. You've been planning society weddings much longer than I have. Maybe we should meet, all of us, to discuss the plans together? Patricia practically purred with satisfaction. What a lovely idea. I'll have my assistant set it up. Over the next 2 months, I attended countless meetings with Patricia, bridal boutiques, caterers, florists, and event planners from her social circle. I smiled and nodded and took notes. I agreed that the botanical gardens might be a bit rustic, and that perhaps her country club would be more suitable. I listened to her disparage my initial choices and suggest alternatives that cost 3 times as much. All the while, she believed she was getting her way. What Patricia didn't know was that Ryan and I had already put our real plan into motion. The reveal. The official engagement party at the Matheson Country Club was set for a Saturday evening in March. Patricia had invited over 200 people, most of whom neither Ryan nor I had ever met. There would be a 5-course meal, an orchestra and formal attire. The night before the party, we sent out a mass text to our actual friends and family. Change of plans. The real celebration is happening now. Details to follow if you can make it last minute. While Patricia was at the club making final arrangements for the next day's party, Ryan and I were saying our vows in the Japanese garden of our original botanical venue, surrounded by 50 of the people who truly mattered to us. My parents were there, beaming with pride. Ryan's sister came, having finally broken free of her parents' influence after years of trying to please them. A handful of close friends served as our wedding party. We had planned the entire thing in secret, with the venue's cooperation. They had been incredibly understanding when I explained the situation, especially after Patricia's attempted sabotage. Our ceremony was everything we wanted: intimate, meaningful, and true to who we were as a couple. The reception afterward was a joyful celebration, free from pretension or family drama. We danced until midnight, ate fantastic food from a local caterer I'd long supported through my foundation work, and felt truly surrounded by love. As a final touch, we hired a professional photographer to document every moment, not just for our memories, but for what would come next. The following evening, dressed in the formal attire Patricia had insisted on for the engagement party, Ryan and I arrived at the country club. The place was decorated elaborately, ice sculptures, thousands of dollars in floral arrangements, and a string quartet playing in the corner. Patricia stood at the entrance, greeting guests in a designer gown that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. Her face when she saw us, arriving together, Ryan in his tuxedo and me in my second, more formal wedding gown, was a picture of confusion. You're late, she hissed. And why are you wearing white? That's inappropriate for an engagement party. Ryan squeezed my hand. Actually, Mom, there's been a change of plans. This isn't our engagement party anymore. I smiled and held up my left hand, showing the delicate wedding band that now accompanied my engagement ring. It's our wedding reception. The color drained from Patricia's face. What are you talking about? We got married yesterday, Ryan said calmly. Our real ceremony was with the people who truly support our relationship. Before Patricia could respond, the doors to the main ballroom opened. Inside, giant screens had been set up displaying a slideshow of photos from our actual wedding. Photos showing us exchanging vows, cutting our cake, dancing our first dance as husband and wife. There was an audible gasp from the assembled guests, followed by applause and cheers. Many of them surged forward to congratulate us, seemingly delighted by the romantic surprise. Patricia stood frozen, her carefully made-up face a mask of shock and fury. Richard appeared at her side, his expression equally stunned. You can't be serious, Patricia finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, we're very serious, I replied. But don't worry. We're happy to use this lovely event you've planned as our reception. After all, you've gone to so much trouble. For once, Patricia Matheson was speechless. As we moved into the ballroom, accepting congratulations from guests who were mostly strangers to us, Ryan's father approached. Unlike his wife, Richard seemed more deflated than angry. You could have told us, he said quietly. Ryan looked at his father steadily. Would you have listened? Or would you have tried to stop us? Like Mom tried to cancel our original venue. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. She shouldn't have done that. No, she shouldn't have, I agreed. Just like you both shouldn't have judged me before getting to know me, or tried to break us up, or treated me like I wasn't good enough for your son. Richard nodded slowly. I suppose we deserve this. This isn't about revenge, Ryan said, surprising both his father and me. It's about Emma and me taking control of our lives and our relationship. We're married now. You can either accept that and be part of our lives on our terms, or you can continue trying to control everything and lose your son entirely. Your choice. With that, he led me to the dance floor for what the guests believed was our first dance, leaving his father to consider his words. The aftermath part 2, the engagement party turned surprise wedding reception, made quite a splash in the Mathesons' social circle. Some guests found it romantic and daring. Others, mostly Patricia's friends, thought it scandalously inappropriate. Either way, it was the talk of Connecticut for months. Patricia, of course, was mortified. Her perfect society event had been hijacked. And worse, she had been publicly outmaneuvered by the daughter-in-law she had spent years trying to belittle. In the days following, she attempted to save face by telling friends it had all been planned. A fun surprise for the guests. But the truth had a way of leaking out, especially after one of the country club staff members overheard her meltdown in the ladies' room and shared the story on social media. The post went viral in their community. Meanwhile, Ryan and I returned from a brief honeymoon to find Patricia had launched a smear campaign against me among their family friends. I was painted as a manipulative social climbing tech entrepreneur who had tricked her son into a hasty marriage. Ryan was furious and wanted to cut ties completely, but I had a different approach in mind. Instead of fighting back directly, I focused on building genuine relationships with key members of their social circle. I joined the board of the hospital where Richard's best friend was chief of surgery. I made a significant anonymous donation to the private school, where Patricia's closest friend served as headmistress. I offered mentorship opportunities for young women at my company, including the daughters of several couples in their circle. Slowly but surely, the narrative began to shift. I wasn't the gold-digging outsider anymore. I was the successful businesswoman who gave back to the community, who created opportunities, who had genuine connections with people Patricia had always considered her friends. Richard was the first to wave the white flag. 6 months after our wedding, he asked to meet Ryan for lunch. He came alone, without Patricia, and offered a genuine apology. He admitted they had been wrong about me, and asked if there was any way to repair the relationship. Ryan, who missed his father despite everything, was cautiously open to reconciliation. We invited Richard to dinner at our home the following week. He came, bringing a wedding gift, a beautiful antique clock that had belonged to his own grandparents. A family heirloom should stay in the family, he said simply. It was his way of acknowledging me as a Matheson. Patricia took longer. Nearly a year passed before she reached out, and even then, it was prompted by external circumstances. The country club where she had spent so much time building her social standing was facing financial difficulties and considering closing. Patricia had been heading the fundraising committee to save it, but they were falling far short of their goal. Despite her pride, she swallowed hard and called me directly. Would I consider making a donation to help save the club? It was, she explained stiffly, an important community institution. I agreed to meet with the club's financial committee. After reviewing their books, I offered not just a donation, but a restructuring plan that would make the club financially viable long-term. Part of my proposal included opening membership to a more diverse group of community members and creating scholarship programs for promising young athletes who couldn't afford the fees. The committee, to Patricia's visible shock, embraced the plan enthusiastically. The club president publicly thanked me for saving an institution while helping it evolve for the future. Patricia found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to publicly thank the daughter-in-law she had tried so hard to exclude. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. That Christmas, we received an invitation to dinner at the Matheson home. It was a stilted affair, but at least it was a start. Patricia made an effort, asking genuine questions about my business for the first time. When I mentioned a new initiative to provide financial literacy education in underserved schools, she surprisingly offered to introduce me to the superintendent of schools in their district. It wasn't a warm relationship, and it might never be, but it was a truce of sorts. 3 years later, as I write this, I'm sitting in our home office, watching Ryan play with our 1-year-old daughter in the garden. Emily Patricia Matheson, named partly as an olive branch to her grandmother, who wept when we told her. The past 3 years haven't been perfect. There are still moments of tension with the in-laws, still occasions when Patricia says something thoughtlessly elitist or Richard makes assumptions based on his privileged worldview. But they're trying, which is more than I expected. The irony is that my company has nearly tripled in value since Ryan and I got married. Last month, we were featured in Business Insider as one of the fastest-growing woman-led tech companies in the country. Richard actually framed the article and hung it in his home office, a gesture that would have been unimaginable 3 years ago. Patricia has even started referring to me as my brilliant daughter-in-law when introducing me to her friends. I'm not sure if it's genuine pride or if she's just enjoying the reflected prestige, but either way, it's an improvement over Ryan's wife. As for Ryan and me, we're stronger than ever. The battle with his parents forced us to define our boundaries early in our marriage and to be absolute partners in a way some couples never achieve. We've learned to communicate openly, to stand together against external pressures, and to build the life we want rather than the one others expect. My success has continued to grow, but more importantly, so has my foundation's work. Using my platform to create educational opportunities for underprivileged kids has become my passion project, and Ryan has thrown himself into it alongside me. Together, we've established scholarship programs in inner-city Chicago and rural Michigan communities like the one where I grew up. Sometimes I think about that engagement dinner, when I revealed my financial status to the Mathesons. At the time, I thought I was just defending myself against their snobbishness. I never imagined it would set in motion a series of events that would not only strengthen my relationship with Ryan, but also lead to personal growth for all of us. Patricia and Richard judged me based on assumptions about my background and finances. They tried to control our relationship and our wedding. They did everything they could to maintain their position of power. In the end, though, I didn't win by fighting them directly. I won by staying true to myself, by refusing to stoop to their level, and by building something positive out of a negative situation. The sweetest victory wasn't seeing Patricia's shocked face at our reception. It was seeing her gradually come to respect me on my own terms. So if you're dealing with toxic in-laws or future in-laws, my advice is this: set boundaries, stay united with your partner, And remember that the best revenge isn't about bringing others down. It's about rising above and creating a life so full and happy that their negativity becomes irrelevant. Money can't buy happiness, but neither can social status or family connections. True wealth comes from authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the knowledge that you've stayed true to your values even when tested. And sometimes, just sometimes, those who once looked down on you end up looking up to you instead. The end.